Scott Reid, CTV political analyst, former advisor to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Scott, I want to go back to something I talked about earlier today. This fallout from day one of the newly minted cabinet of Mark Carney and some of the reaction already before going into their first meeting. Is this still playing out in Ottawa today, or was it?
Uh, Sorry, which reaction are you?
Well, you had Sean Fraser talking about working from home. You had an energy minister, upsetting
Oh,
Alberta.
yeah.
Yeah, that stuff.
Well, no question. It was a bit of a shambly, rambly set of ministerial outs. So, yeah, Gregor Robertson, as you say, talking about housing, sort of, really like a terrible scrum. The Sean Fraser thing, I think, is a little more modest. But and Stephen Guilbeault, which I think is the most serious of all, because the prime minister goes on television the other night, is asked about pipelines, asked about energy infrastructure, and says, listen, right, it's going to be wheels up. We're going hard here. We have to do this in the context of all that we face. And Guilbeault's like, yeah, there are enough pipelines. Like, that's a deliberate, conscious choice on his part. So I'm sure there's some conversations being had. You want ministers to feel like they're out of the yoke of the Trudeau PMO, where they weren't allowed to say or do anything, and they were being held under a thumb. But if you know that something is a core priority of the government, if the prime minister has spoken on it, get in line or get out, man. So I do think that one is in particular an issue, and they're going to have to kind of figure out how they're going to manage stuff. In part, it's because the PMO is not yet staffed up, right? So what are the marching orders? How do we organize scrums? What's the set of general sort of approach to it, and what's the balance between speaking freely and speaking stupidly?
Well, is this part of the fact that Mark Carney, we keep referring to him as not a politician, he's learning on the job, so to speak, and didn't go ahead and do this, or is this about the PMO not having done it, as you suggested?
I think it's more about being new. Look, you can say a new prime minister wants to set a different tone. You can say, well, the prime minister's new to politics. Nothing explains when the prime minister says on a Monday, my view is we need to build pipelines and energy infrastructure. And on a Tuesday, one of his ministers says that's not what we should be doing. There's no, this isn't a matter of administrative mistakes. That's like, buddy, get in line. Understand the boss has spoken. So, what I think will be different about the Trudeau years under Carney is if someone is a minister and there's an issue in their ballywick and they kind of muse publicly about what they might do, they'll probably be allowed to go out there and do that a bit more than they used to. But if it's something on which the government is declared because it's core to their agenda, or that the prime minister has explicitly spoken about, much less a day prior, sorry, man, this is a team game. Be on the team or get off the team.
Okay. I will ask you a couple more that came up yesterday. You had Anita Anand deciding to step into the whole Israel-Gaza debate. I think a lot of people thought that was a bit surprising. And then you have, of course, Francois-Philippe Champagne at the end of the afternoon, letting everybody know, and I think this might have been a huge surprise to most people who don't follow politics, that there will be no budget forthcoming once they decide to sit again. Was that a mistake as well, do you think?
Well, I see those things slightly differently. So Anand is part of what I would call that rocky set of cabinet outs. I don't think that she showed a lot of skill in that. She's going to have to get a little bit on the ball in this new portfolio, and the sort of green banana phenomenon that's going on there. The budget thing is different. The budget thing is a clear decision the government has made. They have made a decision to not bring forward an economic statement in the spring. They have made a decision not to bring a budget forward in the spring. They've made a decision not to bring a budget forward in the fall. So we will inevitably go one full year without a federal budget. And I'm not 100% sure I follow the logic. And I know that we're in a time of high unpredictability. I know that Trump is setting a lot of projections on their ear. I know there's a lot of volubility. But hey, man, put forward a set of economic projections, have an economic, I would have had an economic statement in the spring and said, here's an update on the books. this is the way it looks to us. We'll come back with the benefit of 4 or 5 more months. It might be as late as October, November, December even, but we'll come back with a budget. So what we do not have now in 2025 is a formal budget that says, you know all that defense spending we want to do? Here's how much it's going to cost exactly and what the impact on the financial plan for the country is. Oh, housing, all the money we want to spend there, same thing. How much we're going to have to spend to defend ourselves and protect ourselves vis-a-vis Trump and tariffs, this is what it is. And I think it is an odd decision to say we're just going to try to sail through this whole fiscal year, this whole fiscal and calendar year. It's odd to me.
It's funny as I hear you say that, I think maybe when you factor all those promises made, right, whether it's the tax cut, the home issue, whatever, maybe that number is so big, they just figure better than having, people look at this. We walked away last federal government with, I think, $60 billion was the last deficit, right? If this one is going to be that much more, it just looks worse for people to hear the number is that big. So let's just not, keep it under wraps as long as we possibly can.
Well, and let's say that's right. So then my craven, as like the little finger advisor to the king, behind the throne, like this is as a political aid. That's why I would have said, let's do an economic statement. Let's do scenarios. Let's take advantage of the fact that it is a critical, unpredictable period. So let's say rather than go, here's a set of clear projections, let's just say, all right, you know what? We can't do a budget in the middle of all this chaos right now. So we're going to give you 3 scenarios. This is what happens if tariffs continue to be applied and or expand. Here's what happens if Donald Trump's tariffs are so bad that they plunge the world into a global recession. And here's what happens if things actually start to improve and tail off. So then you're not no one can say, well, the deficit is going to be X. You go, well, we have to see. It's very scenario dependent. Get an economic statement out, live off of that until the end of the year, and then by the end of the year, there should be additional clarity. That's how you would get around that awkward number issue. But just saying, you know what, look, we're going to end up going a whole year without a budget. It's a very unusual thing. It happened during the pandemic. I can't remember a time prior to that. I don't know. I might be wrong, but it could easily have been back to the Second World War.
Yeah, by the way, I think I just saw the number go by. Ontario today weighing in with, a $14.6 billion deficit, so 10 times larger than what had been projected. I mean, maybe that's what scared off the federal government. Who knows?
Well, maybe, but you know what? The provincial government in Ontario will get away with it because they are characterizing it all and framing it all. I mean, legitimately to a certain degree, but also there'll be some things tucked in under there. As a consequence of trying to do everything we can to protect ourselves against the impacts of Trump and the unpredictability of Trump. So, you can, and I bet they won't suffer a huge blow in Ontario. And I think that's why I say I would have brought forward an economic statement in the spring and said, look, man, it's going to cost money to deal with all these headwinds. And then and reset expectations on that basis.
Yeah, so Ontario kind of took your advice, even though you didn't give them that advice. So good for you.
Nobody takes my advice. It doesn't matter whether I give it or not. They still reject it.
Really quick, I want to know what you think about the decision, the press conference today. Bloc Québécois, they're going to fight this by-election result in Terrebonne.
Listen, let's be honest. This is a tough situation. You lose by 1 vote. I mean, imagine how much that would haunt you, right? Like a ghost, man, because 10 people that didn't get around to voting. So you're counting it all the time. And then we have a couple of ballots. I mean, it might be 1, might be up to 4 or 5. Something happened with the special ballots and the postal code was a mistake. But Elections Canada sort of is correct when they go, well, yeah, but man, like they didn't come in on time. So even if it's our screw up, there's no legal mechanism by which we can just say, sorry, we're going to add them to the count. Like there's no kind of like, well, of all things being equal rule. So, that could be a raw deal. But on the other hand, like at some point you got to call it, right? So if the Bloc try to contest this in court, I think the court will throw it out. I think the court will say there is a mechanism, and that mechanism is judicial recount, and we are not going to assume for ourselves that there's some preponderance of evidence that, the conclusion isn't valid. So it's a tough one. It'd be tough if the Liberals won by a vote, lost by a vote. It'd be tough if the Bloc won, lost by a vote. But at some point, I think, you have to say, listen, I didn't like the umpire's call. He said it was a strike. I thought it was a ball, but you kind of got to go with it. And so they're gonna try, but they're gonna fail, is my prediction.
Scott Reid, Scott, always a pleasure. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.